Your brain has a secret switch. It unlocks deeper focus, faster learning, and better problem-solving skills. You don't need to be a genius. You just need to know how to learn like one. A Mind for Numbers by Barbara Oakley reveals the science behind how we learn. And most of us, unfortunately, are doing it wrong. This book is not about math. It's a veneer of math, but it's not about math. It's about mastering the art of thinking. And it is your roadmap to learn smarter, faster, and easier. Let's dig in. The first lesson is focused versus diffuse modes of learning. In the focus mode, a bit like a pinball machine, the ball comes out of the striker and it'll focus itself. It'll go up to whatever section of that pinball machine and it'll just bounce around in a corner or wherever for a little bit. And that's where you're focusing super hard to try to get a chunk of whatever it is you're learning into your brain. An example, when I am teaching a technique, like let's say a reverse kick in Taekwondo, I'm going to go over that technique in excruciating detail. I'm going to tell the class to watch. I'm going to demonstrate the technique while I narrate through it every single tiny move, even where my eyes are, where my hands ought to be, every single move. I narrate, I explain, which means I do it really slow, and I illustrate every single point I'm making and why I'm doing it. So that is the focus then. Then after we get that done, that pinball is going to go off, it's going to bounce off to another area. So then we're going to go work on another technique, and we're going to focus really hard on that next technique. And in between these, our brain is processing in what's called diffuse mode. So that first technique we learned, let's say it was a reverse kick, is now being processed in diffuse mode, as illustrated here, when we're doing the second technique. So if we start with a reverse kick and then we go to some kind of block, maybe we're doing a low block next, the reverse kick is getting processed with diffuse mode while we focus on the next thing. So then when we go back to that reverse kick, it's going to be the tiniest bit easier later. So that is the difference. When you focus really hard to get it into your brain, and then you force that part of your brain to disengage, because then you need to go do a different activity, so you allow the processing to happen in your diffuse mode. And the reason this is so important, the reason it's important to switch up your activities or just take a real break, and we'll get to what those breaks are in a minute. The reason this is important is that if you're laying bricks, that's your focus mode. You lay a layer of bricks and then you put mortar on top of it. That is you focusing really hard on one step, on your very first row of bricks, your very first step. And then you have to go into diffuse mode and let that mortar dry. Because if you don't let that mortar dry, if you don't get that first step really solid in there and go do something else and let your brain process, if you don't let the mortar dry, you're going to end up with a really messy structure that's just going to fall apart, rather than having a solid foundation where you can build on and come up and do excellent things later. You're going to end up with a really, really shaky foundation if we don't do this. Another pro tip on this is, it can be very easy, if you're a fast thinker, it can be easy to come up with a solution immediately in your first focus mode or your second session focusing and get attached to that solution, when maybe there's a better solution. And if you focus hard and get it in your brain and then you go do something different and unrelated, your brain will process that and there might be a better solution somewhere else. And if you just take the very first solution, you get attached to that and you move on, you're not going to give your brain a chance to come up with that better solution. And you're not going to have as good of a foundation. So examples of things you can do to force your brain to go into diffuse mode so that it can lay those bricks and get you a good foundation is, you can go for a walk, you can play sports, you can have a dance party, you can take a nap, meditate. Sleep actually is the ultimate diffuse mode, and we'll go into more on that later. Lesson 2 is chunking. This is where we try to get a tiny little hook in our brain for that very first part so that we can add to it. So here's the illustration. When you first start a technique, when let's say we're doing that reverse kick in Taekwondo, It might take every single molecule of your brain, of that section of your brain, to get that chunk, get that technique into your head. And it might not even be very good at first, but it's going to take every fiber you've got to get that in there at first. And you're not going to have anything left at all to think about any bigger questions. You're just going to say, okay, I've got that in my head now. I've got to get this part. I need to know where to move my foot. You know, all those things that go with learning a new thing, mostly from scratch. So then when the next time you do it, or the second time you do it, or the third time maybe, you're going to be able to do it the tiniest bit better because you focused really hard that first time, and then you went and did something else, and then you come back to it, and you're going to have that tiniest little bit left. Like, okay, this is a little bit easier now. Okay, cool. So this is getting easier. I can do it. I don't have to think about everything. I can think about 80% of the things or whatever, and then you improve on it. And then after a few more repetitions, eventually it becomes much easier, and you have less mental brain space that is taken up by doing it because you've built that brain structure and that habit. And so you're going to be able then, after you get those chunks built, you're going to be able to think about the bigger picture things like, oh, what is this for? What is this technique? What is this move actually doing? When would I use this move? What are practical applications for this move? What, the bigger picture questions that go along with that move, because there are times when a reverse kick is great and there are times when it's really not. And you can't think about that until you've got that chunk, and then you can think about those bigger questions. That's part of interleaving, which we'll get to in a minute. The third lesson is recall versus recognition. So recognition is very easy. It's like multiple choice tests where, you read the question and, we've taken those like, oh, I know it's B because I see that and I recognize it. But the real way to get something firmly implanted deeply in your brain is to force your brain to recall with maybe a prompt, yes, but to force it to recall. This can start as easy as you literally read a sentence and then you close your eyes and you say that sentence again out loud or in your head, and then you open your eyes and you see it and you say, okay, did I get it right or did I not? And then you just keep doing that. You force the brain to recall it, and then you add more and more space in between those recalls. So you force your brain to recall it, even if it is as simple as that. And then eventually you're going to be able to recall it. Like you want to get so that you can recall the information, not like in a setting other than where you learned it as well. Like maybe you learn something really hard, you focus hard, you put it on a couple flashcards or whatever, or an app, and then you go take a walk and set a timer for a few minutes and let your diffuse mode go, and you just watch the butterfly for a few minutes outside, and then you bring up your flashcards or your app and you make yourself recall that information in a different spot from where you learned it. That is what drives that learning deep, deep into our brains, is to force our brains to recall. And then when we have it deep in there, when we're able to recall it and we go into diffuse mode, that is what supercharges our learning. It's fantastic. Next up is interleaving. This is where we mix it up. So we went over that reverse kick earlier, and then we went over a low block earlier. And let's say there were a few more techniques in our moves section of class. So in the last couple minutes of that, rather than just going over all the techniques we did in the same order, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, let's do that low block again. Now let's do that reverse kick. And then I'm going to mix up and say, hey, do this, do technique 1, do technique 5, whatever techniques we did, I'm going to make them do them in a weird order. So if we have like the numbers 1 through 4 kicks, I'm going to say do kick numbers 2, 3, 1, and 4 to make sure that they are recalling, but they are also recalling randomly and differently. So then they don't just think, okay, I do this, 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 and this. No, I can do this, 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 and this, or whatever those moves are. You want to mix it up and you want to do them in different orders to force your brain to come up with different connections to know, when would I use this move? When would I not use this move? Where is it best? What's it for? Oh, hey, if someone's coming down, like we use pool noodles a lot in class. If someone's coming with a pool noodle, I want to be able to block that. So that's where I would use this kind of block instead of that kind of block. So we want to mix it up, and that's how we would know which moves are more appropriate and are going to do the most good. And finally, the spaced repetition system. So ideally, you want to focus really hard and get your first chunk, and then you want to make sure that you review that chunk within a day. When you're learning something new, you don't want to let it sit for more than a day before you review it, or you may lose some of that really hard work you put in. So ideally, we want to review, we want to learn something, then you want to go over it again in a few minutes. Make sure you recall it in a few minutes, and then you want to do it probably a few minutes later, and then eventually a couple of hours later, and then the next day. The more periodically you review it, say a few minutes, a few hours, a few days, a couple of weeks, a few months, the better it is going to stick in your brain, because remember, neurons that fire together wire together. So the more you recall that information and make that new neural structure you have, the more you make it fire, and the more randomly you make it fire. There are actually a lot of apps that are specifically programmed to space out the new learning, the new vocabulary words, or whatever you put into these apps. They're designed to have the ideal spacing of repetition to get it firmly in your brain as easily as possible for you, so then you don't have to think about it. So that's a really cool thing. And that's how this is supposed to work. If you space ideally, your knowledge, your information, your skills will be yours forever. The sleep tip returns. If you go over your material right before you go to bed and sleep, it will be unbelievably easier the next day. I was able to review 9 different color belt forms and get them firmly in my brain in a matter of a few weeks, because I would focus incredibly hard. It only takes less than 3 minutes to go over one form. And so I would focus incredibly hard on whichever form I was working on for those few days right before bed. Literally do it and then go to bed. And then my brain would process that overnight, and the next day, it was amazing how much easier it was, as opposed to if I had not done that. But that is the ultimate diffuse mode, because sleep is when your brain organizes itself, as we know, and it rinses all the toxins out, consolidates your memories, all those things. So highly recommend, when you are focusing on a new thing, do it right before you go to sleep. Even take a nap, but right before bedtime is really best. And one final note on deliberate practice. If you do your practice intentionally instead of just going through the motions, it really does help you learn it much, much faster. We have a saying in class, do it the way you're going to do it. So if you need to put power and attitude into your form, that's what you do. You put the power and you put the attitude, and you don't slack off. Every time you do it the best you possibly can. Thank you so much for watching. If you got one thing out of this video, please hit that like button. If you got 2 things, consider subscribing for more awesomeness. For the 5th agreement and learning to listen to other people's perspectives, check out this video right here, and I'll see you there. And as always, keep being amazing.